The first category of systems that we'll discuss is the systems of regulation. Systems of regulation are things that are going to regulate body processes and coordinate activities. And the nervous system is the number one thing we think of when we think about things regulating or controlling the body. The nervous system does this. It detects stimuli from outside and inside the body. It integrates the information and directs the body's responses to that information. The thing to realize about nerve cells is the nerve cells actually function pretty much the same in any animal that has nerve cells. We've seen lots of different kinds of nervous systems in various animals that we discussed. In the simplest animals that have a nervous system, the cnidarians, they have a nerve net of interconnected neurons, and that works very well when you're radially symmetrical. Okay, once animals evolved bilateral symmetry, and that led to the process of cephalization, or the development of a head region, then you end up with usually the development of a brain with nerve cords. And the brain is generally focused in the anterior end of the body, in the head region of the animal, and it integrates and coordinates with the sense organs, and then sends responses through the various nerve connections to the rest of the body. The next big development as we move up the evolutionary scale in the animals is a ventral nerve cord with ganglia and a more functional brain. This is a more complex system than what we have in something simple like a flatworm. And then gradually over time, as animals evolved, we end up with a centralized nervous system that we see in vertebrate animals. There's a brain, a spinal cord, peripheral nerves, sense organs, and so forth that take care of all the needs of the body. The nervous system is a fast messaging network. And how it's organized is that we have receptors and effectors that either sense the input and provide the output. The input and output is integrated by the peripheral nervous system, the nerves in between the sense organs and the central nervous system, and then the integration and determination of what the response should be is done in the brain and spinal cord, which are called the central nervous system. So the central nervous system integrates the information that it receives from the sensory input, determines what the output should be, and the output is sent to the effector cells to take care of what needs to be done. If you're looking out into your environment and you see a bull charging your way, then that sensory input signals your brain that we need to get out of here, and so that would signal some motor output to your muscles in your legs to start running. The main part of the nervous system is the neuron. The main type and the tissues in the nervous system are generally made up of neurons. There are several different kinds of neurons. This is a generalized neuron. Neurons have numerous structures that are involved in receiving and passing on signals. The dendrites are the receiving part. Dendrite comes from a Greek word that means tree, and you can see that the branches here look like the branches of a tree. This is where the signals are received, and there are many nerve endings here to catch those signals, and they're integrated and connected to lots of different types of other neurons. Some sensory neurons, some are motor neurons, and other kinds of things like that. The cell body, and the main part of the cell here, is where the organelles are located. You can see the ER and the mitochondria and so forth. The nucleus is there directing the activities of the cell. And then the signal is passed through the cell body down the axon. The axon is this long branch that sticks out here and ends up connecting with other cells via the synaptic terminals. Along the way, if you think about the axon as being kind of like an electrical wire, electrical wires have insulation on them, and our electrical wires, our axons, also have insulation on them in the form of something called a myelin sheath. A myelin sheath has layers of fatty material that are wrapped around in these cells called Schwann cells, and they surround the axon down the length of the axon, helping to enhance the signal as it passes on down. In between the Schwann cells are gaps called nodes, and the signal pathway passes down the axon in between those, and then ends up at the synaptic terminals, where the signal is passed on to the next cell, to either another connecting neuron or to an effector of some kind. Now, the action potential occurs in the nerve cells by the transmission or the movement of various ions into and out of the cell. In the normal cell, the cell that is a resting state, as we see down here in this diagram number 1, we have these voltage-gated sodium channels and potassium channels that are closed. They're not allowing anything to pass through. And in the resting state, at the resting potential, you have more sodium ions outside the cell and more potassium ions inside the cell. There are a lot more sodium ions than potassium ions, and this leads to a potential difference in charge between the two sides of the membrane. The outside is more positive than the inside, and so we say the outside is positive and the inside is negative. That's where we are at the resting potential, at the threshold. At the resting potential. A stimulus opens up some of those sodium channels and lets sodium start coming into the cell. What happens there when the sodium ions are coming into the cell, that's raising lowering the difference between the two sides of the membrane so that it's less positive on the outside and less negative on the inside. And once it reaches this threshold here, then the next part continues. Once the action potential reaches the threshold, as we see here, then we're going to end up triggering that action potential. When the action potential is triggering, then that lets more sodium channels open up, and then the potassium channels begin to open up, or the potassium channels are closed, and the sodium channels are open, so we have more and more sodium ions entering the cell. Once the action potential begins, then that process closes the sodium channels and lets the potassium channels start opening. And this process occurs sequentially down the length of the axon. So if I first have an action potential here, and it triggers an action potential right here, then this is going to start normalizing, or starting the closing the sodium channels and opening the potassium channels. And then as it moves down, it's a sequential open, close, open, close, open, close down the length of the axon. The potassium channels close relatively slowly, and that causes a brief little undershoot in the resting potential here. And eventually it returns to the resting state with the charges being like they were to begin with. One thing that helps restore the resting state, or the resting potential, is the sodium-potassium pump, which moves those ions back to their original positions so that they're ready for the next action potential. Now at the end of the axon, as we have with our action potential moving down the axon, and it comes in contact with another receiving cell, another neuron or a muscle, what happens is as the action potential arrives at the synaptic knob, that triggers the influx of calcium ions here in the synaptic region. And the calcium channels stimulate these synaptic vesicles filled with neurotransmitter molecules to move to the end of the synaptic knob, or the synaptic terminal, fused with the plasma membrane, and empty their neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft, the gap in between one neuron and the next cell. These neurotransmitters fit into the ion channels here in the receiving cell, and that opens up those channels to let the sodium ions enter the cell and start the action potential in the next cell. So it passes from one cell to the next by means of the movement of ions as it moves down the axon, and then at the end the neurotransmitters leave one cell and attach to the next cell and start the process in the next cell. Now the nervous system is a fast response. The nerve transmission, or the neurotransmission of an action potential, is about almost 400 feet per second. So it's very, very fast. You can respond very quickly by means of your nervous system. There are other kinds of signals that need to be passed in the body that don't necessarily need to be so fast, but they need to be more widespread. And that system is controlled by the endocrine system. The endocrine system is our second system of regulation, and it sends chemical signals to regulate various body activities. Now you find endocrine systems mostly in vertebrate animals, although there are hormones present in other animals as well. They're just not an integrated system like the vertebrate endocrine system. Hormones are regulatory chemicals that can travel in the bloodstream from where they're produced in the glands to the target cells that they have to act on. Those are called the target cells have receptors for that particular hormone that stimulates a response in that cell to whatever that hormone is. Some hormones also affect the nervous system. There are neurohormones. And as we'll see as we talk more about the glands, there's a lot of interaction between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So this is how hormones work. You have endocrine cells that are located in glands in various parts of the body. They produce inside the cell these hormone molecules that are packaged into vesicles in the cell. And whenever the gland receives a signal, usually from some regulatory hormone, that they need to empty their hormones into the bloodstream, that's what they do. The vesicles move to the surface of the cell. They deposit the hormone molecules into the bloodstream, into the blood vessel there, the capillaries, and the blood vessels carry those hormones throughout the body. The hormones will attach to receptors on target cells that are specific for that hormone. And so it doesn't matter whether the gland is in your head and the receptor is in your leg, or if it's a lot closer than that. The point is that every single cell that has receptors for that hormone has the ability to receive that hormone and react and respond in the way that they're programmed to do so. It can be in releasing another hormone. It could be making additional channels to let something move into the cell. It could be starting a transcription process in the nucleus. There are lots of different responses depending on what the hormone is and what its intent is in that particular kind of cell. But that's how hormones work, by means of the bloodstream, that they pass through the bloodstream to the cells that they're intended to affect, and then they attach to those cells and make the cells do what they need to do. Now, there are lots of systems that are controlled by pairs of hormones, and these pairs of hormones often have opposite effects. And because they have opposite effects, that allows them to help maintain homeostasis. This is called negative feedback. This is when a change in one thing triggers a response that counteracts or turns off the initial change. And this is the way that many systems, including the endocrine systems, are controlled in the body by opposing pairs of activities. One really good here's how feedback controls a hormone production. The hypothalamus, which is part of the brain, sends a signal to the pituitary gland that we need to have some more thyroid hormone released into the blood. The pituitary makes 14 different hormones. In this case, it's going to release some of the hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone into the bloodstream, and it will attach to the receptors on the surface of the thyroid gland. And the signal that it starts there is you need to release some more thyroxine, which is the thyroid hormone. When the thyroid releases the thyroxine into the bloodstream and the thyroxine reaches a certain level in the bloodstream, that inhibits further activity of the pituitary gland and also inhibits further activity of the hypothalamus toward that particular outcome. So then you don't get too much thyroxine. It turns off the production of thyroxine once it reaches the set point. This all works very, very much like a thermostat. In the wintertime, when it's cold, or in the summertime when it's warm, you set the thermostat for a certain temperature that you want to maintain. In the winter, when the temperature falls below the set point in the thermostat, it turns the heater on, and the heater comes on and warms the air until it reaches the temperature that you set, and then it shuts off. And it stays off until the temperature falls again. Same thing with the air conditioner. When the air gets too warm, it turns on the air conditioner, and then when the temperature drops to the set point, it shuts off until the temperature raises again. Same type process. So if you can understand how a thermostat helps regulate the temperature in your house, you can also understand how hormones work to regulate systems in the body. A really good example of how these paired hormones work is two hormones that are made by the pancreas gland called insulin and glucagon. When you eat a meal and your digestive system digests the meal, the various types of molecules are released into the bloodstream or absorbed into the bloodstream, including glucose. Your body seeks to maintain a certain level of glucose in the blood. When the glucose level rises above that, that signals the pancreas to release insulin. When insulin is released into the bloodstream, it has two effects. One effect is to open up the gate to allow the body cells to take up more glucose. Because there's glucose available, let's get it in here and use it to make ATP while we have it. It also signals the liver to take up glucose and to make it into a starch, which is a storage form called glycogen. Both of those things occur until the blood glucose level declines to the set point. And then the stimulus for insulin turns off, and it stays off until the blood sugar rises again. Let's say it's a long time before you get a chance to eat again. You have a practice after school, you have to run a bunch of errands, you get home late, and you get dinner late. And so before you get to that point, your blood sugar is going to kind of drop. It's going to drop below the set point. Once it reaches below that set point, it's going to stimulate the release of another hormone called glucagon. So the low blood glucose level stimulates the release of glucagon. Glucagon travels through the bloodstream to the liver, and that causes the liver to break down glycogen and release glucose back into the blood, which will raise the blood sugar level back up to the set point, and then the glucagon release will stop. So those two things work like your heater and your air conditioner to warm up or cool off what's going on in the temperature in your house. The third system of regulation is the excretory system. The excretory system is mostly involved with maintaining or controlling the uptake and loss of water and various solutes in your body. Water is a problem for animals whether they live on land or in the water. Those that live in the water have a tendency to take on too much water. They want to make sure they get rid of excess water. In terrestrial animals, those that live on land, the bigger problem is preventing too much water loss. The solute control is related basically to the control of various kinds of ions. Sodium ions are one of the most problematic to control, as well as nitrogen compounds, which can be toxic to the body. Nitrogen compounds are produced as a result of metabolizing or using amino acids and proteins. Both types of control depend on controlling the filtration of solutes and the excretion of waste from the body. Now, in the animal kingdom, there are various ways that animals take care of this depending on where they are. Some of the simplest animals use just a simple diffusion to take care of getting rid of their excess weights. Others have very specialized parts called nephridia or gills, and eventually some have kidneys as well. Vertebrates in general have kidneys. Here's why this is necessary, okay? There are various molecules that are used in the body that produce amino groups or nitrogen compounds. Amino groups very easily turn into toxic substances like ammonia. Ammonia is very difficult for cells to deal with, and so they need to be removed from the bloodstream. Now, most aquatic animals, including most bony fishes, okay, can secrete or excrete the ammonia directly through their gills. And so since they live in water and they're constantly the bloodstream is constantly being pumped to the gills for gas exchange, you can also get rid of the dissolved ammonia in the blood. Mammals and most amphibians and sharks and some of the fish actually produce a slightly less harmful chemical. They take that ammonia and change it into a less harmful chemical called urea. Urea is a little bit more stable and a little bit less harmful to your cells. You still don't want a bunch of it to build up in your cells, but it's not as harmful as immediately as ammonia is. The urea is then concentrated in the urine and excreted from the body. And then birds and some other reptiles and insects and other kinds of animals like that make an even different compound, uric acid, which is excreted as a solid along with their digestive waste. Now, here's how the kidney works, okay? You've got the Bowman's capsule here, which is basically the big filtration part of the nephron. The nephron is the functional part of the kidney, and you have thousands of nephrons in each kidney. The blood passes through a capillary bed called the glomerulus through this Bowman's capsule, and basically the kidney filters out a lot of water and a lot of things that are dissolved in the water, and then it reabsorbs things that you need to keep. There's some things you want to get rid of, the excess sodium, excess water, and the nitrogen substances, nitrogen compounds, but you want to keep the amino acids and the glucose and various other molecules like that. And so as the filtrate passes through these convoluted tubules here, then some of those things are reabsorbed. We're reabsorbing some of the sodium ions here, we're reabsorbing some of the glucose and other ions here, and eventually what ends up in the collecting duct is what's your urine. It will then pass to the bladder where it's stored until it's released from your body. And so you have here, if we took this whole capsule and straightened it out, here's our filtration occurring, and we filtered out a lot of different things, but there's a lot of reabsorption and secretion of other molecules and that are taken care of in getting the contents back in the circulatory system that need to be there and getting the urine out of the body.